kills a bunch of Israelis. This is a death by 1,000 cuts. This is the battle Hamas wanted to fight. Are they taking losses? Yeah, I can guarantee you this, though. Israel, we're in a situation that's almost Vietnam-like, where, we become so obsessed in Vietnam to body counts that we kill an entire village and we call it Viet Cong. We killed 900 confirmed Viet Cong, KIA. No, you just killed 900 old men, women, and children. You didn't kill 900. Okay, but the Israelis right now are killing every Palestinian male of a certain age that gets killed as a Hamas fighter. No, I think Hamas has lost several hundred fighters. They have, between them and the other ones, 80,000. So there's a lot of guys left to fight and die. And Israel doesn't have enough troops to do this. The amount of dead, we know that the Israelis suppressed the figures early on up in against Hezbollah. How do we know that? Because an Israeli doctor went into the refrigerated morgue, opened it up, and said, boom, there's more bodies in here, just this morgue, than what Israel's admitted to losing right here. But they're not counting these bodies yet because it's too demoralizing. The Israelis are in one of these. It's like, why do the Ukrainians lie about their numbers? Because if the truth gets known, morale will collapse. So the Israeli government has made a strategic decision to suppress casualty figures so that they don't collapse the morale, the support of the Israeli people. I don't know what the true Israeli casualties are. I do know that the numbers they put out don't jive against the video evidence. Now, there's no guarantee. First of all, a lot of the explosions we see on these Israeli tanks are reactive armor. So you're going to get a nice big explosion that isn't necessarily resulting in a mobility kill or even damage. So it's, there's the likelihood is many of these explosions aren't, achieving a hard kill, and the troops inside are surviving intact. Maybe a little shooken up, going to have headache and hearing loss, but you're going to be okay. So you can't just sit there, well, because they hit all this is happening. No, these tanks are good tanks. They're survivable tanks. They're designed to do this, but they are losing a lot more tanks than this is why they had to stop reselling their old Merkava 3 tanks that they were going to sell to Morocco and others. They had to keep them because they have to organize new reserve armored battalions to make up for the losses that they're suffering in Gaza. But now this fight's turned into an infantry fight, and the Israeli infantry just isn't up to the task. I'm not, I'm an old fat man thousands of miles away from the battlefield, so I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I could do it any better than the Israelis. When I was younger, I could do it a hell of a lot better, and so could my Marines. These guys aren't very good. Russian people Russian commanders who fought in Mariupol, fought in Bakhmut, are looking at the Israeli tactics that they're using, and they're saying if they took this up against a real army, they'd all be dead. But they're not fighting they're fighting Hamas. It's a different kind of fight, but these aren't very good soldiers. They're not, they don't have the discipline. They can't. How can you be, let's just put it this way. If you're a 23-year-old major, you ain't very good.
You're right.
Okay. Major should be around, 32, 35, so that's a whole nother decade of experience you need to have before you're a major. If you're a 19-year-old sergeant, you ain't very good at all.
When I was I'll say this, in law enforcement, when I became captain, I was 36. And I was the youngest captain in the state of Maryland. Of all of the, various police departments that the state has, I was the youngest one. I got major at 38. And that was fairly young, right? Because it takes a lot of years just to know, for one thing, all the policies and procedures. What happens if this happens? You can't hold on, let me go get the manual. You have to know, if this happens, notify this person, do this, call this person. People are going to look at you. This happened. What do we do? You have to know that stuff, rote memory, right? You ain't going to learn that in a couple of years. So even in law enforcement, you're not going to find a bunch of captains and majors running around even in their late 20s. Usually it's their late 30s. The guys are going to have some gray starting to show up here before you start seeing those oak leaves and train tracks start to show up on their collar, right? So you can call somebody a major, But when you just stick them out there, and of course, in the rubble, let's be honest, if we're fighting in the rubble and I'm Hamas, I'm looking for oak leaves and stripes. I'm looking for the guy in that kind of environment. I'm looking for the people with rank to shoot first.
Well, you know why they have majors that are 23 years old? Because, look, I got promoted to captain when I was 28 years old. Okay, one thing I learned to become a captain is that the answer is staff sergeant. First thing, hey, Cap, what about this? Good question. Staff sergeant, hey, Gunny, come here. What's the answer to that question? Because I'm just 28. I may have captain rank, but I don't know. I mean, I was honest enough to say, I don't know. Gunny, staff sergeant, sergeant, corporal, lance corporal, somebody come and help me, please, because I don't know the answer. But that's okay, because I had experienced Marines who would then come in and say, hey, Captain, this is what we think that, and then I would sit there and think about it and come up with an answer. But what's happened with the Israelis, they don't have that. They don't have gunner. They don't have 15-year gunnery sergeants. They don't have 10-year staff sergeants. They got 19-year-old sergeants. So what that means is the tasks that would be assigned to these experienced NCOs in the American system have to be assumed by officers. So they have majors, 23-year-old majors, doing the work of a staff sergeant. It's a totally screwed up system. There were their officers. They're saying this is the leadership ethic of the Israelis. No, it ain't. It's called stupidity. It's called a conscript army. It's called what happens when you don't have a professional army. And just keep in mind that the vast majority of these Israelis out there fighting are young kids with no military experience. These aren't guys that have been in the military for 10 years, 15 years, who've been there, done it, got a couple T-shirts. These are guys, this is their first experience, and they're not trained well. They didn't go. I saw a comment in there about a guy saying, I lived at, I was stationed at Fort Hood, but I lived at 29 Palms, or he lived at Fort Ord. He talked about Reforger, the reinforcement of forces in Germany. That's an exercise that we did during the Cold War, where we would literally every year, or sometimes twice a year, fly 10,000 soldiers out to join up with pre-positioned equipment. And within less than 12 hours of landing, they were in the field with their equipment going through combat drills, because that's the way we had to fight with the Soviets coming across the border. You had to land, jump in, and go. Be ready to fight now. And the only way you could do that is by training 24/7. You didn't even become good at Reforger. I would ask this guy to ask me that. Were you good the first time you did Reforger? No. Why? Because it was all new. You're going, Christ, this is difficult. I don't understand what's going on. You only became good at Reforger about the fourth time you did it, when you went, okay, I know what to expect. I can anticipate. My brain's not going to get bogged down. I can boom. And suddenly things are working the way they're supposed to work. That was the whole purpose of it. But 4 Reforgers meant that you were in for, 2, 3, 4 years before you became good at it. Israeli conscripts in for 2.5 years, half of that time spent just getting basic training. They aren't good at anything. They're not good at anything. And I'm just saying that with all seriousness. They suck. They're good at beating up girls, beating up 10-year-old boys, breaking arms, shooting old men, but they're not good at war. They're not good at it all. You can't even be good at tank operator. Think about that. Who's driving the damn Merkava tanks? Guys have been driving it for 10 years? No, guys that got straight out of armor school, and now they're in a Merkava tank in one of the most demanding environments in the world. They don't know how to use cover. They don't know anything about what they're doing. They're coming in there scared. Bam, they get hit. Now what do? Where's their infantry support? Did they practice that tactic? Half the people out there that have worked with the American tank infantry team knows what happens the first time you go out there and you try to work with the Bradley and dismounted guys. You screw it up badly. You lose every time. Why? Because the enemy's going to kick your ass, because you don't know what you're doing. But then you take that loss, you come back and you talk about it, and you say, okay, hey, rather than you guys deploying here and getting overextended and me coming in without you here, okay, we're going to come in. Get that guy deployed first. Okay, you got that field of fire. Come in here, boom. Okay, get the fire suppression down. Okay, now move in. Now do this. Now you're thinking tactically. It takes a long time to do that. These Israelis don't think tactically. Plus, they're emotion driven. When your strategic purpose is to inflict pain on the Palestinians, that's what you're doing. These Israelis are more intent on making TikTok videos showing them desecrating mosques, burning schools, embarrassing, humiliating Palestinian women than they are focused on the actual business of war. If you're not, I was told, I'll just leave this. I had a Marine captain once drive me from, I took a ride from Washington, D.C. back to Quantico. As we're driving there, we're talking, and he's like, you're going to be a career Marine. I'm like, yeah, it looks like it. And he's like, okay, hey, what do you see out here? And I'm driving through, and it's beautiful land of Northern Virginia. And I went, I don't know, some hills, some town. He goes, you ain't a professional warrior yet. He goes, when you look at that, I want you to see, the best route up the hill, where the covering fire position is. I want you to be looking at, cover, concealment. You have to be thinking this every time you go. We told that same thing with firefighters. I was drive through with my firefighters in town. I'd say, what do you see? Oh, street. And I said, no. You have to see single wall construction. You have to see this. You have to look in there and see the car. Are there children's toys out in the front yard? So if you show up, are there going to be kids in that house? Is there evidence of animals? You got to look at this kind of stuff. When you got to think firefighting. Where's the fire hydrant? What's my best approach so I don't block the ladder coming in? Where are the lines? If you're not thinking like that, you're not a professional. As a Marine, I literally, to this day, I look at everything from a perspective of tactical advantage, operational, logistical sustainability, because I was trained that way. These Israelis, they don't think like that. They don't think like that at all. They're not very good at what they do. And Hamas lured them into a trap of their own making, and Hamas is kicking the living snot out of them.
If you got a couple minutes, you got enough for one more subject? Maybe we'll
yeah.
10 minutes. Okay. Let me share two things with you. Let's look at it. Number one, I'm going to do two. Here's the first one. Breaking: Marianne Williamson claims primaries are rigged, accuses 4 states of bias towards Joe Biden. So what we got is Florida, Tennessee, North Carolina, and Massachusetts. Only Biden's name will appear on the ballot. They will not allow anyone. The Democratic Party has decided those 4 states are Joe Biden's. If Garland Nixon, if Scott Ritter, if somebody who's lived in that state the entire life, if they're beloved by everyone and they say, you know what, I think I want to give it a shot. Sorry, Joe Biden's the only person. It's like we hear about those banana republics. Hey, vote for whoever, and they put one name on the ballot. Now, let's do one other. One more article. All right. Republicans threaten to take Joe Biden off the ballot in states they control, right? And why are they doing that? Because of a Colorado ruling that Donald Trump is not permitted to be on the ballot this year. So what we got is a Democratic Party where Biden, let's face it, he's done. We watched him the other day say that 65 years ago, on October 7th, 65 years ago, he said this. I saw the video that Hamas attacked Israel. His father, he literally said, my father went back to the kibbutz to look for his family. His Irish Catholic father, who died 20 years ago, apparently was living in a kibbutz. 65 years / days. It was madness. And the Democratic Party has said, in our primaries, you can only vote for this guy. Meanwhile, as far as the Republicans are concerned, Donald Trump, like him, don't like him, it doesn't matter. He has every right. You and I have every right to run. Everybody has every right to run. I'm sorry, if you're a person that wants to vote for Donald Trump, nah, that ain't happening. He ain't on the ballot. To call this a miscarriage of justice is absurd. But it's like I said, now Republicans are saying, and as soon as that happened, I said that we'll take Joe Biden off the ballot in states where they control, which I disagree with all of it. But I predicted that would happen. We now have a Democratic Party that has become, I don't even know what the word for this is, fascism, to say we're going to take people off the ballots, where our own constituents, they can't vote. You want to talk about a banana republic fascist activity? This is about as bad as I've ever seen it. What are your thoughts on this, Scott Ritter?
No, I mean, ladies and gentlemen, it's over for America. We've become a joke, a tragic joke. Democracy is dead. I mean, it works at the local level to an extent, but again, who puts the names on the ballot? Ask yourselves that. I mean, when you go to the poll on election day and you go, okay, here's the name, who put them there? Did you? Or did the Democratic Party pick somebody? Or did the Republic? See, we become so accustomed to, um, transferring the responsibilities of citizenship to entities that are unelected, and they get to select for us. So when we go to elect, we're going through the process of thinking we're voting and therefore being a good citizen and we have control, but we're just voting for a preordained outcome, one or the other, picked by somebody else that we have no. We're dead as a society. We are done. You know, I believe in the Constitution and I believe in constitutional processes. And it's illegal to advocate for violent overthrow of the Constitution. It's illegal to do that. But when the Constitution no longer works, when it's become a fraud, when it's become a joke, maybe Thomas Jefferson had it right. I'm not going to repeat his words because I don't want people to get in trouble. You guys can look them up. You know what I'm talking about. The Tree of Liberty. We're headed in the wrong direction. And I don't know what it takes to get the American people to wake up, because it's not just about getting Joe Biden out of office. It's not just about putting Donald Trump or keeping Donald Trump out of office, whatever you want. It's about the system. The system is corrupt. The system is broken. The system is the one that fools us into thinking that this is a democratic institution. We are a joke, literal joke. We go around and we interfere in the electoral processes of other nations and say, well, you don't run elections right. We don't run elections right. Man, there is no singular. We have 50 states that do 50 different things with different ways, and within the states, different things. We don't know how to run an election. Why is it that Iran can tell you the same day who won the election with a very accurate vote count? Why can Iran count votes better than we can? Why can't we count votes? What is it about the American system that has it so that on the day of a national election, we have to wait a week until we find out what vote counted? Guys, it's broken. The system's broken. And it leads to, I'm not going to jump here and jump on the bandwagon of a stolen election. All right. I'm not saying, what I'm saying though is it leads to the perception of a problem. If at the end of the night, you don't know what's going on and then things start happening. Now, people tell you that that's not nefarious and all that, but things start happening, then vote counts start changing. That may be just the process of counting votes. I accept that, but it doesn't look right. It doesn't smell right. And it creates the perception of fraud. And the perception of fraud is more destructive to democracy than real fraud, or as destructive, because people start to lose faith in the system. And then this leads to people accepting at face value. I mean, this is revolution generating stuff. You can only have one name on the ballot. Since when did we allow that as Americans? This is where the Minutemen go in the street and say, hell no, we're changing that. But, Bernie Sanders should have done this back when Hillary Clinton had him kicked off, when he won the damn Democratic primary, but the Democratic National Committee stole it from him to install the Queen. He should have stormed the stage and taken over that process and said, you're all fired. I'm in charge now. My people have spoken. It's democratic process. We got more supporters for me than you do for her. I'm the nominee. The Democratic National Committee is fired. The people have now taken over. Wow. That would have been a revolution. That would have been cool. At some point in time, we have to stop playing sheep. Literally. The thing about sheep is, and I've said this before, but I'll say it again. You're out there, man, you got a dog. He makes you feel good because he keeps you moving in the right direction. Dog's my friend. And then you got the shepherd out there, and you look at the shepherd. The shepherd's protecting me because the shepherd feeds a dog. The dog protects me. And they keep moving me in this direction. I'm happy. And then the shepherd stops. The dog puts me into a pen. Then they open up a pen, and I get pushed in. Shepherd, until I'm slaughtered. That's what we are. We are sheep being led to the slaughter, believing the dog and the shepherd are our friends. They're not. They're just going to kill us. That's the reality of American politics today. We have to be our own shepherd. We have to be our own dog. We've allowed these institutions to be captured by unelected powers, people who operate outside of the control of the American people. And it's we'll pay the price. I mean, we're paying the price, right? This election's a joke, Garland. This election is a joke. Let the people decide. Why is the Colorado Supreme Court jumping in to remove a name from a ballot, making up constitutional law as they go along? Literally manufacturing constitutional law. Nobody asked your damn opinion. It's a Democrat who's pushing this to get Trump off the ballot. I'm not saying I'm supporting Trump. I'm not saying that. I'm saying let the people decide. Let the people of Colorado decide if Donald Trump is their man. And the only way you can do that is to put his name on the ballot if enough people want his name on the ballot. But they're jumping in, they're interfering with the process. The same thing with the Democrats. Marianne Williamson isn't going to beat Joe Biden in Massachusetts. She isn't. But that you don't get to preordain that outcome. In Gaza to a specific outcome for Hamas. It doesn't mean that they're going to achieve it, but if you hit this house, this is what it does to Hamas. And they also know that this is how many civilian casualties will be accrued. So there is no, oh, this is collateral damage. We had no idea so many people would die. This is deliberate murder based on target. It's called the gospel. I think the Jewish term is hasbara or something of that nature. That's in play today. This is mass murder, genocide by the Israeli government against the Palestinian people. And it failed. And so it failed on a number of fronts. It failed in regards to Hamas, but because it failed so egregiously, the Netanyahu government was under pressure from a domestic audience saying, hey, you're not succeeding. We need our relatives freed. We need the hostages released. The entire world reacted to this collective punishment, this indiscriminate bombing with horror. Millions of people in the streets. The United States State Department, filed a memorandum, internal memorandum, a dissent memorandum, saying the policies of the Biden administration are destroying the credibility and viability of America abroad. And so we started putting pressure. So Netanyahu had to agree to a ceasefire. He didn't want to. This was a political disaster for him. And so he was looking for any excuse to get out of the ceasefire. He found it. They're now back at war. He can't afford to have a second ceasefire. That would be the end of him politically. But he's failing militarily. As we speak, the Netanyahu government is being, the IDF, is being defeated in certain areas of Gaza. They've had to retreat from certain areas in Gaza because of the casualties they've taken. This is hugely demoralizing for their military. So Netanyahu is in his government are in a very dire straits in terms of their domestic political reality. There's nothing they can do to change the fact that Netanyahu's political days are over. He is the problem, not the solution. He will be removed from power, either from pressure from the United States or pressure from domestic or both. But we need to stop talking about what Israel wants right now. Israel doesn't want anything. Netanyahu wants everything. He needs to be removed and a new, more legitimate Israeli government in place that speaks on behalf of the majority of the Israeli population, then can speak about what they want. They may not change their policies. Who knows? But I think, real politic will set in, and the Israelis are going to have to make adjustments. Economically, they cannot sustain this fight indefinitely. With hundreds of thousands of reservists mobilized who are no longer participating in the economy, with tens of thousands of Israeli citizens displaced from not only around Gaza, but in the north, forced to be resettled, no jobs. They're living off of the support provided by the Israeli government. The economy is faltering. Hundreds of thousands of Israeli Jews are fleeing Israel for more stable locations. This is a strategic defeat, a disaster for Israel, that if they can't find the way to defeat Hamas, and I don't believe they can. You can't defeat an idea, an ideal, especially one that resonates so strongly amongst not only the Palestinian people, but the entire world. It can't be defeated by Israel. So I think Israel won't get what it wants out of this war. We have to understand that they did not initiate this conflict. They didn't want this conflict. They weren't expecting this conflict. The Netanyahu government on October 6th had a policy that was predicated on the normalization of relations with Saudi Arabia, the initiation of this new economic-based conception that was described by Joe Biden and Benjamin Netanyahu. Biden announced it during the G20 meeting in India, talked about the India-Middle East Economic Corridor. Benjamin Netanyahu bragged about it during his presentation to the General Assembly in the United Nations. This was the direction that Israel was going. Israel was also, under the Netanyahu government, making sure that there would never be a two-state solution, never be a Palestinian state. They were in the process of expanding operations to create new settlements in the West. And they thought that they had bought off Hamas and the Palestinians in the Gaza by increasing the number of work permits, that this perception of new economic viability on the part of the Gazan Palestinians linked to a relationship with Israel, an ongoing economic relationship, would preclude any precipitous actions by Hamas. So when October 7th came around, the Netanyahu government is faced with a whole new reality. And now they're adjusting to it. And this reality is 100% security, politically motivated. It's couched as a security reaction, but it's political. Benjamin Netanyahu was a politician already fighting for his political life prior to October 7th because of what he had done in terms of rewriting Israeli basic law regarding control of the judiciary. It was supposed to be an independent branch of government, and instead, under the new law, it would be subordinated to a politicized Israeli parliament, the Knesset. And the purpose of this wasn't to improve Israeli jurisprudence, but rather to prevent the prosecution of Benjamin Netanyahu on corruption charges. So, hundreds of thousands of Israelis were already in the streets protesting against this man. The Israeli president had said that the situation was so dire that Israel could be looking at an actual civil war. And then comes October 7th. And so you have this already unpopular prime minister now presiding over the greatest security failure in the history of Israel. This is bigger than 1973 Yom Kippur War. This is a absolute failure on the part of the Netanyahu government, but also Israeli intelligence and the Israeli Defense Force themselves. And so the entire leadership of Israel is at risk of losing political viability, meaning that they should and could possibly be removed from power at any moment. The only reason why they're staying in power is because the Netanyahu government now has declared war, or as they have said, war was declared on Israel by Hamas. And if you're in for a dime, you might as well be in for a dollar. So if you're going to go to war with Hamas, now you articulate goals and objectives that reflect this war status. And you say that Israel is going to destroy not only the military aspects of Hamas, the organizational structures of Hamas, but politically, Hamas will be eliminated. Hamas will never again rule Gaza. And if you look at it from that standpoint, Israel has failed across the board. When we take a look at the millions of people who are in the streets in cities around the world protesting in support of Palestine, they're protesting in support of Hamas. They may not admit they are, but the reality is they wouldn't be there if it weren't for Hamas. They wouldn't be there if Hamas hadn't attacked Israel and created this overreaction, or the opportunity for this overreaction. It's Israel that has done it to itself. Israel didn't need to invoked the Dahiyya Doctrine, named after the West Beirut suburb, which in 2006 Israel flattened as part of a new principle of collective punishment, that makes sure that any civilian population linked to a political entity that is, poses a security threat to Israel, that they will be punished collectively to put pressure on them, to pressure their own political entity to stop doing what Israel objects to. It was done against the Lebanese to put pressure on Hezbollah. It failed miserably. And it's been done repeatedly against the Palestinians in Gaza to put pressure on Hamas. This is even prior to October 7th, and it's failed miserably. And it's failing now. This collective punishment that Israel has undertaken has turned the world against Israel. This is a victory for Hamas. We need to also point out that the Netanyahu government was vociferously against a two-state solution, a Palestinian state, said there will not be one. They believe in Eretz Israel, greater Israel, or biblical Israel. That doesn't include any notion of a Palestinian statehood. And so right now, the entire world is talking about the absolute necessity of a two-state solution. Again, this wouldn't have happened without Hamas. Israel had taken thousands of Palestinians prisoner. They'd taken thousands more prisoner, treated them brutally, subjected them to torture, rape, murder. Nobody was talking about putting pressure on Israel to release these prisoners, these hostages held by Israel, until Hamas attacked on October 7th and took hostages of their own, which they use as a bargaining chip. This is a Hamas victory, not an Israeli victory. Israel is suffering huge political consequences. More pressure is put on Netanyahu daily by the families of the remaining hostages to get their release. And Israel is not destroying Hamas. Hamas military is fighting the Israeli Defense Force to a standstill in many parts of Gaza. They're inflicting very significant casualties on Israel. And remember, Israel says that their victory is defined by the total destruction of Hamas. And if Israel doesn't achieve that, then Israel is by definition lost. And Israel right now is not achieving this. So the Netanyahu government has achieved nothing. They've made the situation even worse for Israel, and they've made it worse for them politically. Netanyahu has a 4% approval rating. He had an emergency meeting of his war council the other night, and he concluded the business without holding the things he was putting forward up to vote. The point is, Israel's achieved none of its objectives, and it's not going to achieve these objectives. These objectives unrealistic, and the Netanyahu government isn't doing anything for the legitimate security of Israel. They're doing everything for their own political survival, and I think their days are numbered. I think pressure is being put on them internally from domestic political opposition and externally from friends and allies, including the United States, who are saying that it's increasingly clear that the problem here is Benjamin Netanyahu, and that Benjamin Netanyahu and his right-wing coalition government have to step aside, have to get out of the way.
When it comes to the situation that Israel was in before October 7th, in terms of the relations with Arab states, with other countries surrounding Israel, how do you see it right now?
The fact is, Israel is in very many ways, because of its overwhelming support by the United States, the support that it gets from the United States, has become a de facto indispensable nation of the Middle East. And you combine that with the reality that, with very few exceptions, most nations in the Middle East are not pro-Palestinian. They're not supportive of the Palestinian Authority or a Palestinian state. And that Israel had exploited this antipathy amongst the Gulf Arab nations, for instance, amongst Israel's immediate neighbors, toward the Palestinians for their own good, leveraging the concept of the possibility of a Palestinian state that could never be reach manifestation because of the definition. This is the Abraham Accord. What Israel has said about a two-state solution, it's unattainable, unachievable, unrealistic, but it's there on the table. And the Arab nations who claim to be supporting Palestine, but who secretly don't, say, well, Israel's made a good faith effort here. Now we'll normalize Israel relations with Israel so we can get on with the reaping the economic and geopolitical benefits of normalization. That all appears to be on hold, but nothing's fundamentally changed. The political reality of the situation is such that these nations have to take a stance that appears to be supportive of the Palestinian people of a Palestinian state, but they are distancing themselves from Hamas and they aren't cutting off relations with Israel, which tells me that if and when this conflict ends, and it will end, that there's a real risk that these the nations that are lining up to support a Palestinian state today will slide back to their previous posture of either indifference or hostility towards Palestine. And this will be to the benefit of Israel. Now, the longer this conflict goes on and the deeper the damage that Israel is doing to itself in terms of its how the world perceives it, could create a new political dynamic, a new political reality amongst these Arab states. And if that happens, then there will be a Palestinian state. There's no doubt in my mind. But if this conflict is brought to an end and then the cause of a Palestinian state goes into endless negotiations by people who really don't have the best interests of Palestine in mind, we could find ourselves returning to square one, which then brings up Hamas, which is not going to quit until there is a Palestinian state. And I think that the failure of Israel to defeat Hamas empowers Hamas politically and gives them increased leverage to tell the Arab world, the Islamic world, that we will not go away. We will not quit. We will continue to resist. And that the best way to bring peace and stability to the region is to create a true Palestinian, independent Palestinian state, which includes Hamas as a political entity. You can't make Hamas disappear. If there were elections in the Palestinian, in the Gaza and West Bank today, I think Hamas would win overwhelmingly. The Palestinian Authority has no credibility, none, zero credibility. Hamas has all the credibility in the world because it's the only Arab organization that's fighting for the Palestinian people.
How do you see the possibility of Hezbollah getting more seriously involved in this battle? Is that possible, in your opinion?
Oh, of course it's possible. It's even likely, given what Hezbollah has done is it has maintained a extraordinarily high levels of pressure on Israel along the border between Israel and Lebanon. The purpose of this was to force Israel to divert resources from Gaza to Lebanon and to put strain, economic and political strain on Israel at a time when it was supposed to be singularly focused on resolving the Gaza crisis. Up to 70,000 Israelis have been evacuated from northern Israel. They have to be housed, cared for at enormous economic cost to Israel. Whatever economic activity took place in the north has come to a halt. So that's an unsustainable reality that Israel can't just allow to occur. And Hezbollah keeps ratcheting up the pressure. Israel right now has confronted Benny Gantz, the Minister of War, has come out and said that Israel has no choice but to turn its attention to Lebanon to compel Hezbollah to withdraw from the border. This is suicidal. Lebanon is as prepared for whatever Israel is going to do as Hamas was prepared for Israel. And Hezbollah is an organization that has far more military capacity than Hamas. It will be fatal for Israel to expand this conflict. And I think that's why it might not happen, is that the Israelis know that if they engage decisively with Hezbollah, they will suffer a decisive defeat. And that could be very problematic, not only for the Netanyahu government, but for anybody who's joined his coalition, his wartime coalition, like Benny Gantz and others. So it's a very dangerous situation, one where there is an absolute threat of an expansion of this conflict to draw in Hezbollah but also one that the consequences of such expansion are so dire that it might be difficult for Israel to act on it, which is what Hezbollah is betting on, that Israel will make a decision to seek a ceasefire before they make a decision to escalate. Time will tell.
One of the countries that is so important is Saudi Arabia. How do you see their policy in Gaza? Are they looking for some sort of sanity, some sort of solution for Gaza?
Well, their official position and what their real position is might be two different things. Their official position is that they support Palestine, they support the Palestinian people, they support a two-state solution, and therefore they are opposed to the ongoing Israeli actions. Their unofficial position is they were ready to normalize relations with Israel to, offset the axis of resistance, Hamas, Hezbollah, Syria, Iran, the Houthi, pro-Shia militias in Iraq. Yes, because of China, Saudi Arabia, and Iran had normalized relations. But that doesn't mean that Saudi Arabia is going to roll over and play dead. It was not a Saudi surrender. And Saudi Arabia was very interested in ensuring that it maintain a dominant geopolitical position vis-a-vis the Middle East. And they were looking to do that by normalizing relations with Israel and creating the conditions where Israel would be able to insert itself into the Persian Gulf region in a way that helped offset, Iran's growing stature in these nations that are linked to the axis of resistance. So the Saudis are in a very, they're stuck between the horns of a dilemma right now. They can't continue to carry out a policy which, by any stretch of the imagination, is pro-Israeli in nature, normalizing relations, bringing Israel into the Gulf region to offset Iranian influence. And they can't ignore the new reality generated by Hamas's military operation on October 7th and what's transpired since then by ignoring a Palestinian two-state solution. So I think what Saudi Arabia is doing is buying time, saying all the right things, hosting a conference, but doing nothing, and waiting to see where the chips finally fall before they would decisively commit. Remember, Saudi Arabia's number one purpose for doing anything is to benefit Saudi Arabia. So they're not going to be looking for something that brings about in and of its own right regional peace and security. They're going to be looking for something that benefits Saudi Arabia. It may be something that benefits regional peace and security, but it may be something different. Saudi Arabia has a vision, I think they call it Vision 2030, about a new Saudi Arabia, new economic realities, new social political realities. And that's the direction that, MBS is taking Saudi Arabia. And they cannot support anything that threatens that vision, because that vision is about a redefining of Saudi Arabia. It's what its economy looks like, what its geopolitical posture looks like, and that's going to require a lot of money to make happen. And that money won't be there if Saudi Arabia does anything that causes a disruption to, its oil-based economy, or fundamentally changes the balance of power in the Middle East, so that Saudi Arabia is compelled to take an action one way or the other. So this is a very, very dangerous situation, and one can always hope that the Saudis find a way to navigate their way through these troubled waters. I think it's important to point out that Israel wasn't the only nation taken surprise by Hamas's attack on October 7th. Saudi Arabia was taken by surprise, and Iran was taken by surprise. Prior to October 7th, Iran and Saudi Arabia were working together to create regional stability based upon, the emphasizing diplomacy over military confrontation. They had exchanged ambassadors, and they were, moving forward in a very coherent fashion to achieve, I think, their collective desire for regional stability. After October 7th, both Saudi Arabia and Iran are struggling to catch up to the reality of what happened. Iran certainly doesn't want a larger regional war. Iran doesn't want to be drawn into the fighting, and Saudi Arabia doesn't want that either. Remember when Saudi Arabia hosted the Arab League and the Organization of Islamic States to a conference, an emergency conference on Gaza? Iran participated. The Iranian president has flown to Riyadh and has met with MBS and other Saudi officials to talk about the Gaza situation. So I think what we're seeing here is that Iran and Saudi Arabia are making sure that whatever transpires vis-a-vis Israel and Hamas, that their relations will remain on track in terms of, positive interaction, conflict avoidance, peacemaking, and joint economic prosperity. So I think you're going to see the
settlement before he was assassinated by a right-wing Israeli. And now Benjamin Netanyahu has stepped into the gap, and ever since then, Israel has been drifting towards an even more radical right-wing solution. As long as Benjamin Netanyahu and his ilk are in power in Israel, there is no hope for peace, none whatsoever. And you are right. Israel will go into Gaza with a vengeance, and hundreds, if not thousands, of Palestinians will lose their lives. And in the end, some morally conscious nation, and I say that with the greatest, I don't believe it. There's no such thing as a morally conscious nation that keeps their tongue silent now. But some nation, the United States perhaps, will say enough is enough. Even we can't stomach the slaughter that you have perpetrated, and it's time to bring this fighting to a halt, and the cycle will begin all over again until the next time. Now, the only hope for this outcome not to go that way is if Hezbollah gets involved in a major way and breaks the paradigm. And if Hezbollah is backed by Syria and Syria is backed by Iran, and then we will see the strategic defeat of Israel. We may see the end of Benjamin Netanyahu physically or politically, and whatever replaces him in Israel will be somebody who is compelled by this defeat to seek peace in a way that's equitable for the Palestinian people. But until which time Israel is strategically defeated, there's no hope for peace, none whatsoever, because Israel, as it currently exists, can't have peace, because peace requires them to treat the Palestinian people with respect, with dignity. And Israel today is incapable of treating the Palestinian people with the respect and dignity, not only that they deserve, but that they demand. What happened yesterday, as violent and ugly as it was a manifestation of the demand that the Palestinians be treated seriously, with respect. I, like everybody else, I think shudders at the death and destruction that took place. I wish it had never happened. But you sow the wind, you reap the whirlwind, and Israel is reaping the whirlwind right now as we speak. It's tragic, but tragically it's necessary.
What do you say, Scott, to those who doubt the scale of the negligence that appears to have been involved in all of this being planned? It clearly was planned. The build-up to it must have been long in the making. And yet this most heavily surveyed patch of earth in the world, all this was taking shape and then executed with quite spectacular levels of military success, however ghastly.
Look, there's no doubt that Hamas has pulled off, and this will be studied for years. Again, military professionals have to put aside politics and study military events with a professional eye. And what Hamas did yesterday is one of the most remarkable military feats in modern history. First of all, to be able to plan this without being detected by the Israelis is, as you indicate, almost miraculous. Now, I have an answer as to how this came about. I actually have just written an article. It'll come out in Consortium News later this afternoon that addresses this issue. But I think this, Winston Churchill once famously said that he quipped about the War Office that they are always fighting the last war, never the next war. Israel is guilty of that in my mind. They are fighting 2021, Operation, I forget whatever, they named so many things, Wall Guardian or Guardian on Walls or something like that.
Been so many of them, yeah.
But Israel openly bragged at the end of this conflict, which they claim to have won, and yet Hamas still exists. They said this was the first artificial intelligence war. That you mentioned it. It's the most heavily surveilled piece of terrain in the world. Every 10 minutes, every meter of Gaza is photographed by Israel. And that data, those images go into a giant computer database. They collect every cell phone conversation, every text message, any email messaging. They have total control. They have human spies on the ground. And Israel bragged about this right afterwards in 2022. The first artificial intelligence battle, we had total domination of the information spectrum, and we were able to use artificial intelligence to predict outcomes, meaning that it wasn't a human being now that is telling Israel what to do. It is a computer algorithm put together by Israeli intelligence, and the Israelis bragged about this. And I will say this about Hamas and about the Palestinians and about Hezbollah. They aren't stupid. These are some of the smartest people on the planet, and they are survivors. And as soon as they heard that Israel had turned over the thinking process to a computer, I believe they sat there and they gamed the system. And they sat there and they created a whole bunch of artificial information that lulled the computer into a false sense of complacency. And because the Israelis had yielded their thinking ability to a computer, they went into Yom Kippur mode. And I don't mean this year, I mean 1973, where once again, all the information was there that an attack was going to take place. Hamas said an attack was going to take place. This is not a secret. Hamas has been saying over and over and over again, this is coming. We are going to do this. We will avenge the Al-Aqsa Mosque. So any thinking person, any rational person would have said, we need to prepare for this. But because Israel yielded its thought process to a computer programmed by people who did not respect Hamas, this intelligence failure took place. That's what I firmly believe.
Now, the whole of the south of Israel was, for a time, out with the control of the government in Tel Aviv, Jerusalem. The Palestinian militants, the factions, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, many, many groups, some of which I actually hadn't heard of before. They were all running amok. They were attacking settlements and settlers. They were defeating Israeli forces that they found. They were capturing Israeli police stations, military bases, prisons even. Why did it take Israel so long to get on top of the situation, even given the caveats that you've just made about how they missed it coming in the first place?
Well, there's a couple of reasons. I mean, first of all, we'll never know until the Israelis do an honest to goodness, form a commission to do a politically neutral autopsy on what happened here. But I can speculate, and I just want everybody to understand that that's exactly what's happening right now is speculation. Israel has been a fundamentally broken state in terms of domestic politics for some time now, ever since Bibi Netanyahu returned as prime minister. His corruption followed him, his attempt to shield himself from prosecution by taking over the court system so that he and he alone can appoint judges that are favorable to his position has divided this nation, the nation of Israel, like never before. Prior to the Hamas attack, there were hundreds of thousands of Israelis taking to the streets on a regular basis to protest Benjamin Netanyahu. Thousands of Israeli reservists, the very reservists are being called up now, said they will not serve an Israel that has a Bibi Netanyahu who violates the basic fundamentals of law there. So Israel was a divided nation. The military also, I believe, has just taken a unique stance regarding modern warfare. Look, there are many Russians right now who have learned the hard lessons of war over the course of the past 600 plus days in Ukraine, who are looking at the imagery of the Israeli military response, saying these are the most amateurish people we have ever seen in our lives. Their tactics, their approach, the timid nature of these soldiers is shocking. I think the Israeli army has lost the ability to close with and destroy the enemy through firepower and maneuver. They are so casualty averse that they've created a whole unit based upon unique technologies to let robots do the fighting for them. They let computers do the thinking for them. The last thing they want to do is put one of their soldiers on the ground against somebody who is trained and capable of killing them. They're very good at beating up women, beating up children, beating up villagers, beating up old men, old women, but they're not very good at fighting people who stand up and fight back. And let's be clear here, the Hamas people who are fighting right now, these are lightly armed people with what their courage is cannot be doubted, but their skill set is limited. These are people who have not had the advantages of the military training and technology that the Israelis had, and yet they're fighting them still today, as we speak, outside of the Gaza Strip, in Israeli territory. They hold 30% of the territory that they captured on day one, and they are fighting. The Israelis can't beat them yet. They will beat them. There's no doubt about that. But Israel has forgot how to fight. They have forgot, because Yom Kippur 1973 was so bloody for them. Their experience in Lebanon was so bloody for them that they said, never again, we won't do that kind of fighting. Unfortunately, when you raise the level of hatred in a captive population, such as the Palestinians in Gaza, and those people decide to rise up, you are going to have to fight. There's a lot of incompetence going on in Israel right now. There's tremendous amount of military incompetence. The people I feel sorry for, to be honest, I mean, I'm just being frank here, are the Israelis who lived in the South. Not because of, there's a political question of should they be there, et cetera, et cetera. But these are people who believe the Israeli government when the Israeli government said, we will keep you safe. You can go to sleep at night. You will be safe. We will be there for you. If anything happens to you, we will come for you. And they were abandoned by their government, abandoned by their military. They're still abandoned to this day. Shame on the Israeli government. Shame on the Israeli military. There should be mass resignations, but this is all done because the men and women who wear the uniform today, who didn't come to the rescue of these Israelis in their time of need, should be evicted from their positions.
If Israel does invade on the ground, and given that there are now a very substantial number, more than there have ever been before, of Israeli prisoners taken in this Al-Aqsa operation, Al-Aqsa flood, there are real problems about a ground invasion that imperils we now know many Americans are amongst those who have been taken prisoner. These prisoners, hostages, will be held in exchange, hoping to exchange them for the 5,000 plus political prisoners in Israeli jails. So a ground invasion is fraught with that difficulty of harming their own people, but also the risk of bringing Hezbollah into the conflict, and thus the possibility of a very big war, two-sided war, indeed. So do you think they are going to go in? And if so, how will that work out?
Israel conducted a major military exercise earlier this year that tested this very scenario. What would happen if an uprising in the West Bank, uprising in Gaza, Hezbollah intervenes in the north, Iran intervenes. What would Israel do? And they did this major exercise, and it turned out that Israel lost. Israel can't win that war. So Bibi Netanyahu knows this. He was the prime minister when this exercise was held. His senior military officers know this. And so I have to believe that they're not suicidal. And now the question they are probably asking themselves is Hezbollah bluffing? Will Hezbollah really commit to this fight? Or is this just a bluff, and should we call Hezbollah's bluff? Because there's a tremendous amount of political pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu now to be seen as doing something decisive to bring this Hamas issue to an end. And that requires a major military move into Gaza, which I will tell you right now, Israel will lose. Will lose. Because the Israeli army can't suffer casualties. Going into urban warfare, if you've learned anything from Mariupol, if you've learned anything from Bakhmut, these horrible names that have come out, and I say horrible because of the death and destruction that took place in the fighting for these places, Gaza will become like that and worse. The Israelis will suffer losses like they can't even imagine, greater than the Yom Kippur War in its totality. And this is politically unacceptable for Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israeli people. So I can't tell you what they're going to do. What I can say is that if they go into Gaza, they will have to stop their operation almost immediately, because every force there in Gaza will be needed in northern Israel, because when Hezbollah comes in, they will make what Hamas did the other day look like child's play. The entire north will fall. Haifa could be put at risk. Hezbollah will come in a very serious fashion. Their missiles, their rockets are not these bottle rockets launched by the Hamas, and I'm being a little facetious here, but those are children's toys compared to the modern precision-guided missiles that Hezbollah has. Tel Aviv will be destroyed. The Kiryat, in the center of Tel Aviv, where the military headquarters is, will be flattened. The prime minister's residence will be flattened. Israel will be flattened. Its airfields flattened. That's the future of Israel, and there's nothing they can do to stop it. The Iron Dome doesn't work. Their missile defense systems do not work. And then when Hezbollah attacks and shows victory, you think Syria is going to remain silent about the Golan Heights. No, Syria will move on the Golan Heights. They have 2 divisions they brought up to combat readiness as we speak. And if Syria gets engaged, will Iran stand on the sideline? Iran understanding now with Hamas, Hezbollah, and Syria decisively engaged, now is the time to end the Israeli threat once and for all. And Iran